review both the concept and practice of food sovereignty, why we need food sovereignty, and what's the practice of agroecology by highlighting some of the political imperatives as well as its links with solidarity economy and social solidarity economy. We all know that we live in a world that is plagued by multiple crises, and one of this is actually the global crisis of hunger and inequality. For example, the FAO already says that there is enough food in the world to provide everyone with enough kilocalories per person per day. But there's so much hunger that's happening in such that 1 in 8 people suffers from chronic hunger. But there's so much food wastage that is happening around the world, and 1 in 14 people are obese. So we can see that this global crisis is actually systemic and structural. And one of the main cause and effect of that is actually the climate crisis, and particularly industrial agriculture, for instance, contributes to about 25 to 40% of the greenhouse gas emission. But at the same time, the climate crisis or climate change have so much profound impact on small-scale agriculture and people's lives and livelihoods. And then there's also the pledges of world leaders, but it's really more of the same. They say that they want to eradicate hunger, but it's really anchored on food security concept, which we find, at least personally, and also from movements like La Via Campesina, as a politically lacking concept. In the Southeast Asian region, there's this interesting index called the Global Hunger Index, which actually is a tool to measure and track hunger at the different levels. And they measure undernourishment, child wanting, child stunting, and child mortality. And in ASEAN, we really are faring very badly. There's moderate to serious hunger risks. You can see from the figure, from the graph, that the most faring better, quote unquote, in the region is Thailand, which is about 46 out of 113 countries that were surveyed for this hunger index. And in the Philippines, we're the third to the last among our ASEAN neighbors. So we can see that there's a lot of things that the government is not doing in terms of addressing hunger and inequality in the country. So why food sovereignty? Why not food security, for example? Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's really a politically wanting framework. It started to be used by the UN agencies in the 70s. Initially, it's focused on food availability of food supply, and which in a way means production-oriented policies. They kind of tweaked it in the 1980s using Amartya Sen's poverty and famines thesis, which means that food availability is not only the key thing, but there's also the issue of entitlements and deprivation. That's why they moved to access of individuals. But what's missing with food security is the how, where, who, and for whom, as well as what's our relations with nature and the environment, which unfortunately neoliberal globalization in the anchored on food security anchored on neoliberal globalization has created a disjoint between the consumers and the producers. That's the first point. The second reason why there's an imperative to shift the paradigm from food security to food sovereignty is that it really promotes agricultural liberalization. No? When you talk about only access and availability, you don't care where the food comes from, as long as it's cheap and it's accessible. And as we've seen from the experiences of many countries, including here in the Philippines, we've seen a lot of dumping happening. No, we've seen experiences in by our own farmers in Nueva Ecija where they cannot sell anymore. There's a lot of oversupply, probably because of dumping, and these are really the result of policy prescription and processes for opening up our economy for cheap foods to come into the country. And third, it really allows, if you talk about cheap and cheap food, you allow for control for the big players. So these are Nestle, Kellogg's, these are the big industries or agribusiness which has more capital and more investment to create cheaper and non-nutritious food. And in the Philippines, you talk about your Philippine agribusiness and retailer conglomerates. Who are they? They're the oligarchs of the country. So in essence, the food security concept further nails down the dominance and the entrenchment of our Philippine capital into not only into the agriculture sector but every aspects of Philippine society. So why is it time for food sovereignty? Food sovereignty has been a concept, an alternative that has been proposed by La Via Campesina during the 1996 World Food Summit. La Via Campesina is a worldwide peasant movement that has presence all over the world, and they're primarily small. Their members are primarily small-scale food producers, farmers, fisher folks, rural women, pastoralists, etc. And they use human rights as a language to support political demands. The key thing with the food sovereignty as an alternative is to again put the political at the forefront, forefront, because food is very political and it basically challenges neoliberal trade-based food security and agricultural production. So in the slide, you can see the definition that La Via Campesina and its supporters have put forward in 2014, and it basically emphasizes the right of individuals, communities, peoples, and countries to define their own agricultural, labor, fishing, food, and land policies, which are ecologically, socially, economically, and culturally appropriate to their unique circumstances. So already, there are so many important elements here that in a way reflects and resonate with the social solidarity economy. That is, for instance, the importance of autonomous self-determination and decision making in creating safe, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food, and that even includes recovering your own food consumption and your own products that has been decimated by industrial and corporate based agriculture. Second, it respects the ecological systems. It really highlights biodiversity and the environment, which is really crucial if we want to cool the planet and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Third, it prioritizes the local, the aspirations of those who produce, those who distributes and consumes the food versus the needs of the markets and corporations. And fourth, it emphasizes that we need policies that favors our small food producers. So this is just to show you sort of like a representation of what for La Via Campesina espouses when it talks about food sovereignty. It has so many elements, but at the center of that is pro-poor peasant family farming, which I think Monina will share her experience in the in the next presentation. So now I move to agroecology, and agroecology is basically a practice that is one of the cornerstones of food sovereignty. I think this statement by La Via Campesina leader basically sums up what I want to say, that food sovereignty without agroecology is a hollow discourse. It's just a concept, essentially. And agroecology without food sovereignty is mere technicism. So each one gives meaning and substance to each other. They're like two peas in the same pod, or two sides of the same coin. But to maybe explain the concept, agroecology is a science. It's also a method and practice, and it's also a movement, because there's an agroecological movement that actually has members from around the world. It uses ecological concepts in the design and sustainable management of sustainable agri-system. One of its contexts, or two of its contexts and goal, is both social justice and community empowerment. No, that's why it's kind of veering away from the mere technicism or technical requirements that usually our agriculturists from the Department of Agriculture just provides to farmers. No, and a primary element of this is the defense of territories and lands against commercial, corporate, and industrial form of agriculture. I would like to emphasize this because this is essentially a counter movement against industrial form of agriculture and distribution of food to the consumers. And a very important element as well is the emphasis on leveraging traditional local knowledge on seed savings, food consumption, and crop diversification. I'll move into that by showing you an example of a practice that happened in an agrarian reform hotspot and Yolanda Corridor in Leyte. So just to show you that 10 principles of agroecology. It emphasizes diversity or biodiversity. There's an emphasis on resilience, especially on the soil. Emphasis on efficiency and recycling, the recovery, as well as culture and food traditions, co-creation and sharing of knowledge, no, and human and social values, so even ethical values, for instance. And it's very important to emphasize the idea of synergies. No, we talk about Maminday talk about creating a networks of community shared agriculture practitioners. That's really at the center of agroecology as a principle. And on the right side, it talks about also the importance of a circular and solidarity economy and responsible governance. So this is basically this graph or photo sums up the important principles of agroecology, which many practitioners abide by. Yes, and if we talk about agroecology, we always put an emphasis on the small and biodiverse and this circular economy or cyclical nature of food production and distribution, as well as resource recovery. Because if we see the way that our food system right now is happening in the Philippines and elsewhere, it stops on consumption and retail. You know, usually you don't have resource recovery. Everything is waste. That's why a lot of international, national, and local organizations are really worried about the food wastage that's happening. And juxtapose that to so much hunger, not only in the context of COVID, but before COVID, is really even immoral. Is an issue of immorality. So quickly on the example of farmer field schools in Agaran Hotspot and Yolanda Corridor. This example was actually practiced by Rights and Katarungan, which is a rural development NGO and peasant movement that has membership across the country. It's very important to emphasize the context which they operate, because often when we look at when we talk about practices of agroecology or agrarian reform, for instance, they always happen separately. But in their case, they did the struggle simultaneously or in parallel, because the context calls for it. One is that there's really a huge exclusion of farmers from humanitarian aid and government support, and they've uncovered a lot of undistributed lands in Leyte, despite being reported as accomplished by the Department of Agrarian Reform. There's still a persistence of illegal practice of shared tenancy, even though it should have been banned for over 30 years. And if you remember Yolanda, the impact has been destroyed coconut trees, but the reality on the ground is that this is a monocrop style of production, which is also very unsustainable. And then there's the extreme changes in weather. So given that context, they thought of combining both asset reform and people-centered rehabilitation by having two strategies. One is to train and support farmers to diversify farming activities, repair their soil through agroecological and organic farming, because as I mentioned before, this has been monocropped soil. So there's a lot of soil recovery and that has been practiced or done by shared by the organic agricultural technician. That's the technician on the left side, and the couple of farmers that entered into this practice. So here are some of their, they've engaged into integrated diversified organic farming, which is something that's new and a first in Leyte, that has probably been sort they're not used to this kind of type of farming, no? So it's kind of hard to shift perspective in the beginning. So it entailed a lot of convincing, as well as really internalization and conscientization among the farmers. But they were really happy with the kind of practice and benefits that the farmer field school, as well as the after school farming that they did. The second strategy that they've practiced is to, while they're doing this shift in paradigm and practice, they tried to fast-track rehabilitation and reconstruction demands through the resolution of pre-existing and long-standing land and tenural rights, because their argument is that we cannot continue farming with the fear that anytime our lands might be grabbed from us by landlords or any corporations because we have
Mary
tenurial
Ann,
security issues. Yes. Yes, 5 minutes?
5 more minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 more minutes.
So I'm
Okay.
nearing the end. Yeah. So just to show you
Okay.
some of the just the previous slide to show you, these are some of the land distribution ceremonies that and dialogues that happen between the farmers as well as the Department of Agrarian Reform. And so far, they were able to distribute 3,000 hectares of land to about 3,588 agrarian farm beneficiaries because of this rightful resistance that the small and landless farmers have embarked on. Just to emphasize a very interesting experiment, the Kamansi Collective experience, because before they're used to individual farming, but one of the members of the Kamansi Farmers Association actually embarked on collective farming. And key here is the training as well as the convincing that were done by their president, Ines Caneres, to start the collective farm, no? And now their farm it has been set up. It started in 2017. It's now 3 years. They managed to increase their incomes, but at the same time ensure household food security. But at the same time, they were able to engage government agencies as well as the provincial and local government to get to have contract with them to directly purchase the excess supply of their harvest for the local government. So this is just to show you some of the photos of their farm. Yes, they have a fish pond as well, some chili, and they have a cassava dryer, and they also have a sort of like on the spot market for distribution. They have a rice mill, as well as a chicken layer and vermi compost. So what's the link with solidarity economy and social solidarity economy? I think three things. One is the common vision. I think when Mom Inday sent me some materials on the solidarity economy and social solidarity economy, because I assume there's some difference in understanding as well as in practice. It both food sovereignty, agroecology, and solidarity economy actually seeks to change the whole social and economic system, and they want to put forth a different paradigm of development that upholds all its social solidarity economic principles. And at the same time, it's really these three systems or these three models pursues the transformation of the neoliberal capitalist economic system that puts emphasis and priority on maximizing profit over and growth over the people and the planet. The second thing is it's the three models or concepts and ideas are all pluralist in its approach. That's why let a thousand flowers bloom, no? Because they emphasize on culturally appropriate food production, distribution, and consumption. So you can assume that there's so many examples that happening around the world. There's no one size fit
Yes,
all
Mary
practice.
Ann,
And
last 2 minutes. Last
and
two
fine,
minutes.
yes, sorry. Sorry, it's a bit interrupted. I'm just on I'm just on the last slide. So the last emphasis is on emphasizing similar elements between food sovereignty and agroecology, as well as to what Dr. Quinones mentioned about the five strategic dimension of social solidarity economy. It has to be socially responsible governance. It must emphasize edifying ethical values, people-centered development, environmental conservation, socioeconomic sustainability. So you can see that the three ideas and practice, although coming from different imperatives, actually have a lot of complementation as well as similarities. And we can, I think, moving forward from this, we can, and knowing this, we can very well push for a network of networks, or at least uh, move forward with highlighting these alternatives that are happening not only on the theory level but also on the practice. Thank you very much for your time and listening.